Hi guys, today we're going to be taking care of the discs and pads on a 2018 Transit Custom. If you've seen any of my other videos, you'll know I've had this van for a while, this along with the white one the same, that's been slowly just slightly modified. This video's basically going to take care of the discs and pads because they shake a little bit on the motorway and the MOT is due in a couple of days. But as well I'm going to do a wheel refurb and a brake caliper paint in two separate videos, so if you want to see them, keep watching and subscribe. There's plenty of other content on these vans. Like I say, on the motorway, round about 70 mile an hour, when you touch the brake pedal, it shakes a little bit. I had it inspected when it got a service and knew that the brakes were needing to be done, so this is the time to do it. The van's done 80,000 miles on its original rotors, and that's not too bad if you ask me, especially since it carries a lot of weight all the time. All these parts are from Ford, so these are genuine OEM brake discs. This is kind of like the Ford kit that they give you because a lot of the parts are one time only. So they're the caliper slider bolts, they're 15mm stretch bolts, they come with Loctite already on them. These are the drive shaft bolts, 36mm nut. These are very tight, so you do need a strong arm to get these off. These are the disc bolts that hold the disc onto the hub. Again, stretch bolts, 13mm. Once you've used them once, they're dead. These bigger ones hold the caliper carrier, and these T50 Torx are the bolts that basically hold all the hub assembly together. And you do need a long bit for this because you have to reach through the holes in the hub. So first of all, obviously, before you even start to jack it up, you just want to crack these nuts, because once you've got it up in the air and things don't start to move and things rotate on you, so just get these done first. And as I say, with the drive shaft bolt, that is very tight. I'll give you all the torque specs as I'm putting it all back together. Obviously, safety first. When you're working on something like this, I'm using a jack plus two 3-ton axle stands just to make absolutely sure that nothing's going to go south. Get all this set up properly, make sure everything's lifted properly before you even start taking the wheels off and things like that. You can see how low the pads are and that huge groove on the top of the disc. I think you can have these ground back to a certain extent, but this van gets used too much, so I'm just going to go brand new, all from Ford. So the first thing to take off is the slider bolts. You need to hold the actual slider in position, otherwise you'll just be turning this bolt the rest of your life. So spanner and a socket, take both of these out, and this just basically releases the caliper, so you can get the pads out and everything else off. 2 bolts, this part comes off. There we have it. It's a good idea really to keep the caliper on something just so that you're not stretching the brake line too much. I mean, they can take it, to be honest, but if you have got something to hand, then just use it. Next is the actual caliper assembly, the main frame of the caliper. You can take the pads off before you take this off, but I just find just whipping the whole lot off in one go is a lot easier. So there go the pads. That's the caliper bracket. And next we're on to the actual hub assembly itself. Now this is always going to be quite tight and it needs knocking out, but one tip is to leave the old bolt on, just in case you damage the threads, and then you can wind the bolt back off and that'll kind of correct the threads if you do just nick them slightly. But these do need knocking out because they do get stiff, especially after 4 years and 80,000 miles. This is the long T50 that I mentioned earlier that you need to find through the holes in the hub assembly. This you have to rotate until you find the correct alignment. Can be quite tricky to find them, to be honest, and I was finding that just tapping them in with a hammer stops them from slipping, because if you slip and thread these bolts, you're in a world of trouble, to be honest. You're not going to have a fun day. Now next, what I'm doing here is taking out the 5 bolts that actually hold the disc to the hub. You don't actually have to do this just yet, but I just find when it's on the van it's just easier to get them out now. And I actually put 2 back in briefly just while I take the actual hub assembly off, just to stop everything falling apart on me. But as you wind these out, you'll realise how stiff they are, because they are stretch bolts, and you'll see when I put them back in what I mean by that. Now to prise the hub off. This, I made it look easy here, it's not easy. It took quite a lot of hits with the hammer, and again, even now separating the disc from the wheel bearing, it's never going to come straight off. You need to really whack it apart, to be honest. They just kind of rust a little bit and fuse together over time, but they do come apart. You just need to keep at it. There we have it. That's pretty much it. Now it's just a case of cleaning stuff up, really, and then getting ready to put it back together. One thing you do have to do, which I'm doing now, is press the caliper back in, just to allow the room for the extra pads, because obviously the new pads are going to be thicker, and the disc. With these, it's easy to stick the old pad back in, because if you try and push one piston at a time, it'll just pop the one next to it out. So using an old pad in this way just ensures that they both go back in kind of at the same time. They do require quite a lot of pressure, but just again, stick at it, just keep slowly squeezing them, and you'll see they will retract eventually. Just don't expect it to happen immediately. You need to keep pressing them. But there we have it. That's the pistons reset, ready to be put back together. That allows you the clearance for the new thicknesses of everything. Before these go back together, they're all going to get a paint. I'm actually going to do them red, because that's sort of the theme to this van, but that's a different video. And look at the state of the rear of these old discs. No wonder it was shaking a little bit on the motorway. To be honest with you, I'm surprised it wasn't shaking a lot more. There's actually chunks of metal missing. There's huge grooves. Granted, the pads have been changed a couple of times in the 4 years I've owned the vehicle, but not the discs. If I'd have known that they look like this at the back, I'd have changed them a lot sooner, to be honest, because I bet it was just chewing through pads for no reason, looking like that. You can see there the state of the old inner pads. Grooves completely matching the grooves in the disc, obviously. Face of them wasn't too bad though. That was the old front of the pads. This is the rears. The pad that you don't see, essentially. Because obviously that's the front of the disc and this is the back of the disc. But look, you can see the pieces of metal that are missing. It's really quite bad. But 80,000 mile, fair enough. So the last thing to do before it all gets put back together is pull the caliper sliders out. These need all cleaning up properly and everything removing off them, then re-greasing and putting back together. But I'm gonna paint the carrier first. So this is it coming apart, and obviously next time we see it, it'll be a different colour. It was the sliders, the rubber boots, and then the little pad clips. I'm not quite sure what you call these, but you get all these new from Ford anyway when you buy their brake kit, so they just need to come off and get thrown in the bin. Obviously remembering which direction they went on. There we are, back in red. All these parts have been cleaned up off camera, so it's just basically a case of making sure there's plenty of grease in them. Just putting them back together exactly as they came apart, with all new shiny greased up parts. These, you need to keep these greased up nicely, otherwise you end up with brake binding issues and things like that. These are the new carrier clips. You need to remember which direction these faced when you took them off, because if you get them, I don't know what if you got them wrong, I don't suppose it would matter too much, but just try and get it back on the right way. It's just a case of cleaning a few little last bits up, just giving them a quick wire brush just to stop them catching and making noise. Everything around this area is going to rust eventually, so there's no point cleaning it up too much, but just get the loose rust off helps. It definitely helps when they're putting them back together. Now these bolts that hold the disc back on, I'm just putting them in loosely for now. All the bolts that I put back on to start with, I'm going to do loosely, and then I'll torque everything up all at once right at the end, and I'll tell you the torque specs that I've gone to. So again, grease, 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 absolutely everywhere, just to stop things rusting and binding and just make life generally easy for yourself. Now this can be quite tricky because you've got to line the wheel bearing up with the disc, and then you've got to line all that up with the hub assembly. And this did take a few tries, to be honest, but once you've got one bolt in, you're fine. You can get all the rest in, no problem. Again, I'm just going to go gently tight for now, torque it up after. You can see it there, starting to pull the wheel bearing and the disc onto the hub. Next, the drive shaft bolt, or the axle nut, whatever you want to call it. This I'm just going to impact right on because the torque these needs to be set at is pretty substantial, so the gun, I'm just going for it with the gun, and I'll check it afterwards with the torque wrench properly. Next we're on back with the caliper bracket with the nice new bolts. These are the bigger bolts, the 21mm bolts. Just two of them hold this on. I'm just going hand tight again, because to be honest, to torque these do need to be quite tight, so I'm going to undo the steering lock and turn the actual wheel once I get to torquing these down. Copper grease is your friend when you're doing brakes, because this helps stop them squeaking and make sure everything stays free. So just copper grease on any metal parts that touch. Pads you'd feed in at kind of 45 degrees, bottom in first, and then just twist them once they're inside the clips, and then they just go straight in just like that. Really, really easy. Finally, just to fit the hydraulic part of the caliper, this just slots straight over the disc and pads and everything, and then your slider bolts go back in, just two of those, one at the top, one at the bottom. Again, if you remember how it came apart, you're going to need to hold the slider itself, otherwise you'll just be turning this bolt forever. I'll show you that in a second. Now it's time to get everything torqued up to spec. So first of all, these T50s that hold the assembly all together, these want torquing up to 46 foot-pound each. Obviously go around them a couple of times because they do keep pulling slightly, so once you've tightened one it'll loosen the other. So just go around them a few times, get them all to 46 foot-pound. Next we'll move on to the disc bolts themselves. These are a different way of torquing. So first of all, what you want to do is get all these bolts torqued to 20 foot-pounds. Again, go around them a few times just to make sure they're all there. Once you've all got them all exactly to 20 foot-pounds, then what it asks you to do is an extra 90 degrees on the bolt. So this is obviously the simplest way to do it is to start with your wrench at 12 o'clock and end up at 3 o'clock, and that's your 90 degrees. So that's how I've done it, and that's how Ford say to spec them, how to torque them. So next we're on to the caliper slider bolts. And these get torqued to 43 foot-pounds for these, holding onto the back of the slider again. Once you've got these torqued to spec, I turn the wheel because the caliper assembly bolts actually want to be quite tight. These go to 203 foot-pounds, so you need a bit of pull on this wrench. So I've just turned the steering wheel to make it a bit easier, just to get all the way up to 203 foot-pounds. Once that's done, the very last bolt to do is the hub nut. Now the torque of this, it just really depends who you ask, but the easy answer is very tight. I've I've picked a torque of 280 pound-foot, and that is extremely tight. We'll see how it goes, but it feels about the same kind of tension as it was when I removed it, so I'm hoping I'm somewhere in the ballpark. Either way, 280 is very, very tight. It's very tight indeed. Here we are, all back together. Discs and pads completed in this video. The caliper painting and the wheel refurb are two other videos, so if you want to see them, take a look at the other videos on the channel. Give us a like and a subscribe if you like this video and want to see some more content like this. Thanks for watching, guys.